thanks everybody for joining. This is what, our seventh public lunch and learn we've done this year. So kind of continuing the theme of about once a month, we're trying to do Mondays, noon Eastern time, continue our lunch and learn. So it's something we started years ago for our teams. Every Monday we would do a lunch and learn on a different topic. And, we've had a lot of partners and outside folks interested, and so we're trying to continue that theme and share some of that publicly every month. So keep an eye out on our LinkedIn page and any of our email invites for the coming months. We're gonna, I think, keep doing this in 2026 as well. So thank you all for your time and attendance and interest. Today, so it's November, snowy day here in Ohio. We're going to talk about all great things BACnet. And I'm happy to have with us today to kind of help co-present Ping from Optigo Networks on the call. So Ping, thanks for joining. He's over there in not snowy Vancouver. So appreciate you.
Hello, everyone.
So a little bit about kind of BuildingLogiX and Optigo Networks before we get into it. So we started working with Optigo several years ago. Time flies when you're having fun, but I think it's actually kind of been quite a while. But we were introduced to Ping and Optigo a number of years ago, kind of on a couple different fronts. We were looking to get training and understanding of BACnet and the protocol itself for our internal team and professional development. We also, on the analytics side, had come into a number of cases where our different partners or building owners had bad in quotes, BACnet networks, where there was a lot of communication issues, a lot of finger pointing going on what people thought the problem was. IT didn't really know anything, facilities didn't know anything. The vendors kind of threw their arms up, it's not our fault. And last person to the party, the analytics team, gets the finger pointed at them saying, oh, you guys are reading data, you must have, be the cause of all these problems and whatnot. And we realized we need more info to back it up because, in fact, we had the least amount of impact on the network, and there was all kinds of stuff going on behind the scenes that the building owner and operator wasn't aware of. So that really started our journey, 7 or 8 years ago, trying to delve more into BACnet network monitoring. And so that's now one of the services that we offer is dedicated kind of BACnet monitoring professional service contracts. And then we've also incorporated Optigo and their tools into a pre-post analytics snapshot, pretty much on most installations that are dedicated BACnet that we deal with for our main BDX platform. And that kind of gives us before and after picture to show even though it's large volumes of data, how small analytics actually and read property traffic can impact the network. So with that, what we're going to talk about, Ping and myself today, and might have a little bit of commentary from Alex as well, is really trying to talk a little bit about BACnet and some of the technical pieces to it. What are the benefits and promises of it? A little bit on some fundamentals, and then we'll talk about some real world pitfalls, how monitoring makes sense, what it might help you with, really some of the bigger picture stuff, and then we'll kind of end. I got some Q&A stuff for Ping, and then obviously anybody who wants to post questions, both as we go, and at the end, we'll kind of monitor the chat and have some time dedicated for this. So we won't take up your full hour. We'll give you some of your lunchtime back, but we'll try and make it worth your while here. So a little trivia, feel free to post in the chat. So looking for the answer to when was BACnet kind of first conceived, and what I mean by that is when did the first special committee meet to talk about creating BACnet? Not necessarily when BACnet first came out or when it was in its first IP controller or whatnot. If anybody has a guess on when that might be, feel free to paste it. In general, BACnet has become pretty pretty dominant or the dominant protocol in the building automation industry. And that's, another important reason why to talk about it, especially, here in North America. You can see the numbers here. These are a couple years out of date, but pretty much at this point, I'd say 95% or higher. Most building automation systems that are going in buildings or getting retrofitted into buildings are in fact using the BACnet protocol. Now, the BACnet can be kind of a blanket statement. So as we progress through this, we're going to try and give you a little bit of understanding of some of the details and the context. What is BACnet? So in case you were wondering, let's see. Yeah, no guesses in the chat. So the first BACnet committee met. It was actually 1987. So yeah, I think Doug's pointing out Cornell University, BACnet in the early 90s. So yeah, it wasn't until the 90s, I forget the actual date on when the first BACnet standard was actually published. It might have been like 91, something like that. BACnet IP wasn't until later, but it was 1987 that a small special committee out of ASHRAE met to conceive BACnet and really try and create some of this universal language and standardization more in the industry. So little fun fact, that first meeting, that SPC 135 group, they met at the Gaylord Opryland Convention Center in Nashville, Tennessee. And a little plug to our friends at in Nashville, Gaylord Hotels. Ironically, this is actually a project that we're involved with in the present day. 30 plus years later, after BACnet was conceived, the Opryland has been undergoing a big conversion to modernize their building automation infrastructure, and it's all standardized on BACnet. And so I just thought that was a funny, one of those coincidences. I'm doing some BACnet training, getting a little history, and it's, hey, what do you know? These air handlers that we just connected at the event center is where BACnet started back in the day. So little fun fact for you.
Also a great example of how slow our industry moves.
Well, and that's part of the reason I brought it up. Thanks for reminding me, Alex. So 1987, technically that was before I was born, is when BACnet started and has been around. So the HVAC industry does move slowly, and some of the problems that people encounter on their BACnet networks could be the result of stuff that was done, a decade ago, or the way of thinking that was, implemented or engineered a decade ago in a building. So there's a lot of things to unpack. And even in the newest of new buildings, brand new controllers, there oftentimes can be BACnet problems and software problems and other things, or, somebody changes the default setting on a controller and didn't realize what the cascading impacts of that could be if it's implemented on an entire campus versus a standalone building versus a test environment that the manufacturer, did some of their initial testing on. So there's, this whole, we'll call it kind of underground community related to BACnet. And even though it's a standardized protocol, every vendor, company, integrator can approach and understand it differently. So having tools like what Optigo Networks has really helps create some common language, engineering, and whatnot to bring these core concepts of BACnet with best practices together on how to implement.
So, Dan, if I may,
yeah, go ahead.
2 quick comments just to help guide. And Dan has another slide later on what is the definition of open. Just a quick comparison. When someone says API is open, they are not entirely incorrect, but BACnet is what we call full stack. So it goes from the network layer all the way to the application layer, and all of it is open. So including how to gather data, how to push COV notification, that is defined by the standard. Whereas in an API, every vendor has their own API scheme. So API might be open because it uses HTTPS, but the APIs themselves, if you use an API from vendor A and an API from vendor B, they are different. Number one. Number two, when Dan talks about BACnet networks, I just want to be clear, and we'll talk more about this. In the IT world, when we talk about networks, is a composition of switches and IP routers, firewalls, and gateways. In our world, in OT network world, an OT network or BACnet network includes BACnet routers, gateways, right? So it includes things that are communicating from one network to another network. So when Dan says the network has problem, it doesn't necessarily mean the IT network. In fact, it's rarely the IT network. So just to move forward, those are two important things to keep in mind.
Yeah, no, great additions. Thank you, Ping.
Hey, Ping.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Go out.
Just real fast. Give a little bit of your background. Some of the people may have met you or know you, but several probably don't. Can you just give a little, I'll say high level on Optigo and yourself and your background, please?
Yeah, I'll tell you more later. My name is
Okay.
Ping. Thank you, Alex. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm sitting here in Vancouver, as Dan said earlier. Optigo Networks been around since 2012. We focus on OT networks, operational technology networks. It's just a marketing fancy word, but really what we do is BACnet systems networking. We are not a competitor to Honeywell or Siemens or Distech. We don't produce the application nor the controllers, the devices, nor the field devices. We sit that new layer in between. We're not switches and routers neither. We are this network layer, and we understand how BACnet traffic should work, what is good, what is bad. And I consider ourselves that rare breed expert in the IT world and the BACnet world. So we kind of understand enough about BBMDs to be able to talk to an IT team on how UDP ports should be set up on their firewall, but we also understand how a VAV works and air handlers, not to the extent that Dan does, but enough to be able to explain why this might impact the health of the system. Yeah, thank you, Alex.
And you guys are, I think, one of the first organizations in the space that were trying to tackle this problem, if I recall. Like, there's become more in recent years around just general BACnet training or very focused stuff, but you guys, I think, were definitely the leader. And I encourage you guys to go look at their websites, their YouTube channels. They have a lot of good content out there related just to like education and awareness on BACnet. So, yeah, thanks for all you guys working in that space. So, back on BACnet. Yeah, we are obviously big proponents of it. The BACnet stack, like Ping mentioned, does have a lot of capability, function, benefits to it, and it can also be very complex. Occasionally, I'll go open the standard to look for something, and you can, buy the textbook off Amazon that has the whatever 1,400 pages of content around all the ins and outs of the protocol itself. And frankly, it does a lot more and has a lot more capabilities than, certain vendors engage with. I think a lot of vendors adopted BACnet as a standard because in some ways they needed to meet and fulfill a lot of the engineering specifications that were coming out around open systems. BACnet does provide interoperability in a lot of cases, and we'll kind of explain, a little more on the promise and difference, but a couple fundamentals I wanted to start with are in BACnet, there are devices, and devices can have objects and properties, and then there's certain services that'll work and communicate back and forth. Kind of in a nutshell, I'm not going to bring up the entire protocol stack, but in layman's terms, it's really important that on any particular OT network, there are devices, and those devices have IDs. So like the two examples down below, these are two different VAV controllers. You'll notice this middle column here, they have two different device IDs. So if you imagine a big network, a large hospital, university campus, K-12, school district, you name it, it's really important that on the same BACnet network, there can be no two of the same device IDs. So that can cause problems, and is one of the many things that Optigo's tools check for. The other thing is when people think of devices, not all communication is the same. So within BACnet, there's what's called unicast messaging, where I'm picking up my cell phone at a certain number, and I know exactly who I want to call, and I'm going to type in your cell phone number, and we're going to talk directly to one another. That's a unicast message. kind of what I'm doing right now is more of a broadcast message. There are a ton of devices out on the network, and I'm sending a type of packet that is going to any and everybody who can accept broadcasts and goes through all routers and et cetera. So there's two main types of messaging that serve different purposes. And sometimes the implementation of those on different networks can kind of get crossed or become detriments to the network. So I'll talk about broadcast rates in a second here, but making sure there's not too much spam happening behind the scenes, especially for MSTP devices, is very important to their operation. Likewise, how routers and BBMDs are configured is also very important in order to use the BACnet networks properly at scale. So, Ping, is there anything else you want to add there?
Yeah, one thing I would say is one of the big elephant in the room, those who here have been using BACnet systems, you may start complaining. People might say BACnet is bad, this and that. I just two quick comment on that one. One is BACnet is prone to issues. That is a fact. BACnet can be very, very chatty. Because it's so open, when it's not used correctly, it can become a massive problem. And that's what Dan is talking about here. How do we deal with that? But it is the best we have. I just want to make that clear. So if someone comes to you and says, BACnet is crap here, we should remove it and move to something else, trust me, the grass is not greener on the other side. BACnet, the openness of BACnet is a strong, strong reason why BACnet is successful.
Yep, and I think it's here to stay, definitely.
Hey, Ping, very good comment. And I'll ask, maybe don't leave the hanging Chad there for anybody that understands that reference. What's the other grass? I mean, when you say the grass is not greener on the other side, and I would agree, but what's that other grass look like? Because I'm asking because I mean, we have customers saying, hey, we're looking for a solution. I'm tired of being trapped, and some people are exploring, I'll say some not far-fetched, but is there a better way? I'm just kind of curious. What do you mean a little bit more specifically when you say that?
Yeah. So when I evaluate a product, I'm always looking at from three angles: the technology, the product itself, right? The market, and the people. Okay, so let's just talk about technology-wise. I don't know everyone here, but I'm sure many of you have worked with Modbus, and Modbus hasn't been a problem. But think about Modbus. Every registered list is different, right? You want to add a new device with Modbus? It's not open. The read writes are open, but not the register list. Not every device uses the same register for the same function. Number one. So on the opposite end, API, you're going to have vendors now coming to you and say, you should go API. That's a modern way of doing it. There is one big advantage of API. It's much quicker, but it is not open. If you use a system from vendor A and you implement their API and then tomorrow you come in and you want to add vendor B, not because you want to replace, but you want to add vendor B, unless vendor A is willing to share the API list with vendor B and help them to develop a plugin, a translator, it's a lot of work. So that will be the two ends, right? You have like the Modbus or the industrial automation, very high performance on like Profinet and things like that, but very closed in the sense of it's a low layer that's open. An API, very high performance. It is the way the world is moving, but those who have been on the business side and trying to integrate an ERP system with a CRM system, you'll know what I'm talking about. It's a very costly effort to integrate API.
Yeah, those are good references, and yeah, anybody that's gone through an ERP implementation knows it's like banging your head against a wall. So
yeah, there are weaknesses in BACnet. There's no two-way around it. But I think the whole point of this lunch and learn is to be aware of these weaknesses and manage it.
I think one of the weaknesses or areas where I see people that have misunderstanding is how routers and BBMDs work, or BBMD or foreign device become a foreign language, and contractors or implementers get scared or have a different idea than the standard on how things are supposed to interconnect and work and whatnot. And I think, I don't know about your experience, but that seems like one of the fundamental things of, we'll call it larger networks, is some person has the expectation, this is how I'm building it, this is how it works, and then maybe a couple other people or a couple other vendors get involved, and all of a sudden networks grow and grow. But there's never a specific time where it's like, you are the responsible party for the network. Is that the contractor? Is that the owner? Is that the IT department? So oftentimes, when we work with folks, the contractor was kind of the first owner of the network, but at some point, the contractor, somebody retires, somebody new comes in, there's new technology, there's all these layers that get added on. And part of the reason problems happen is because, there's not like a preventative maintenance checklist for the network, like there would be on, the HVAC side when somebody's responding to an alarm, or there's not a way to check and see like, well, how much traffic is hammering this router? Can this router reach this other network? Like, are there packages being dropped or errors or alarms or a broadcast rate so high that your timeouts on your graphics, the data's not even up to date and you don't realize it. Do you have anything you might want to share in terms of organizations and, successes they've had with who owns the network? Because I think that's how action gets happen. That's how things get cleaned up. Somebody needs to own the network at some point, and it could be a collaboration of people, but where do you see people drive, or, is it the contractor, is it the IT departments, or is it the facilities managers who are typically driving, health checks, cleanups, that sort of thing?
What we found is in organizations, sorry, not organizations, pardon me, in sites, in buildings, in systems that have a single vendor, the contractor should be responsible for the end-to-end system, which includes the network. Whether the network's provided by IT on top of the performance of the system should be owned by the contractor. That's an easy one. If there's a single contractor, you're responsible for the entire system. As soon as you get to more than one contractor, more than one vendor, that becomes a lot more difficult. And unfortunately, the correct answer that I found is that the organization owning and operating the site needs to be the owner of the health of the system. And that's where it breaks down, because most organizations do not have a building automation team, let alone a network, an OT network analyst individual, and therefore you rely on your contractors. But can you expect contractor A and contractor B to coordinate? And when they don't, then you fall into that potential problem that what Dan is talking about, where two devices, same device ID, two networks have the same ID, two BPMDs on the same subnet. And then contractor A said that last person that came in is like contractor B, therefore it broke because of contractor B. And it's not, may or may not be true. So unfortunately, the answer is a difficult answer, but the only way I found it to work is to either rely on, for lack of a better term, an MSI, someone like BuildingLogiX that comes into an organization with multiple contractors and act as that police on top of the entire system, or you have to take it on as a building owner.
We'll call it a peacekeeping force as opposed to police.
Yes. Yes.
Well, I've seen like even on single vendor sites, oftentimes you'll have, other third-party stuff or other integrations that hit the BACnet network. Like let's say it's an entirely Johnson Controls or Siemens, those are the two biggest, the entire infrastructure on the building automation setup there. But you might have a Honeywell fire panel, you might have some Dan Foster Yaskawa drives on the network that somebody installed as part of a project. Maybe they didn't even know they were
controllers.
Right. So I think even if you're a single vendor these days, having some accountability on what connected devices are hitting the network, I think, that's a movement we're going to start to see. And I kind of encourage people, like, are you keeping an inventory? Like, because a lot of times, from a device level or a project level, the facilities team, seems to be aware of what's in the building, but then, IT oftentimes gets involved because they're adding stuff, and then they start asking a bunch of questions and kind of comes up. So what I tell people is it's kind of, you don't want IT necessarily dictating or making a bunch of assumptions about the OT network. it's good to start to build some domain knowledge in the facilities team or the utilities team around building automation. So, because eventually these are kind of very simple network diagrams we're bringing up here. You could have a building with multiple floors with different subnets and different, room controllers or a plant. And each of those networks would then need to have a BVMD, and then, route back to the rest of the network that might go to your building automation server and graphics. And it might share a global weather service with something on another network, or you might have a third-party scheduling tool or an optimization or analytics that you want to bolt on. And very quickly, these networks can get very big. And somebody needs to make sure there's housekeeping done over the years on that. So that's kind of one of the big things we always encourage. And one of the ways that we've been trying to say promote good habits around that is we have created a campus document that if anybody wants, we'd be happy to share. It's just, I think, 4 pages, kind of talking about some of the best practices we've seen on how people document networks, how you might label devices. Like, so, if you have a bunch of devices, maybe the building name or number, or the vendor ID for the type of equipment. I think going back to contractors and being able to say, hey, here's our standard going forward on, how we set up networks, how we address devices, how we name devices. I've seen, a couple campuses really, have some success in doing that too. So to try and build those good habits, we do a follow-up document if everybody wants, just a couple fundamentals and then some best practices we've seen. We'd be happy to share. But really,
just a very quick note on that last image you just had, that standard. That's amazing. First of all, thank you for providing that to the community. I think this is very, very helpful. Anyone here that runs EBI point server, so Honeywell EBI, let Dan and I know. Be careful if you use something like this. If you have more than one point server, you want to separate the point servers by range of ID, and it becomes very problematic if you do something like this. So just a quick note. Yeah.
Safety plug.
Yeah.
So I think talking about, that was a little bit into the details and weeds of some things that you might, want to explore further, but really the promise of BACnet here and, its genesis was to help standardize the industry, give a really foundational stack that could be built on to promote interoperability and give owners more choice. So you'll hear the term open system, open building automation, and BACnet is, like Ping said, an open protocol, and we're big proponents of it. Part of the problem is, as vendors have implemented BACnet differently, while you might be able to read certain points or discover devices on the network, if you're really wanting to get into the weeds or take more control or have more flexibility on your contractor choice, there are some fence rows that have been put up and are things to be aware of, either in specifications or how you select or add contractors when it comes to the control side that are important. So the open of BACnet and the promise of BACnet can become closed if you fall into a couple of these traps. And how severe this might become to you really depends on, the size market you're in, right? The size of your market can dictate how many choices you have for building automation contractors. Are they OEM branch offices? Are they independent offices? What are the size and capabilities? And then, sorry, were you going to say something, Alex?
No, not yet.
Okay.
But
So
you're going down. One of the things that I'm really curious. Actually, I'll preface. I'm gonna have questions. I'm interested in your and Ping's kind of viewpoint on this, where open becomes closed. I mean, because we've had a perspective as an MSI and a professional services business. Ping's worked more on the networking side, and I'm curious on what his viewpoint on it is too, because the perspective matters.
I think where you go from open to closed with BACnet, really the first 3 are kind of related to that contractor relationship with the type of technology you're using on your network. So you can have BACnet, but you might not be able to program it or own the license on certain things or get trapped to certain integrators, because how BACnet gets implemented can be very differently. How it gets programmed can be very differently. What points are available can vary widely based on manufacturer. So there's not a set standard based on, a VAV or a chiller or you name it. If you look at a train chiller, a Daikin chiller, a York chiller, Carrier on down the line, what you get from them in terms of, new chillers with BACnet cards, their points list is all going to look completely different from one another. They're entirely spec'd by the manufacturer. So, you might not get certain points from some manufacturers. You might have, a convoluted way to control a certain piece of the device if you're trying to do it directly over BACnet versus using their native tools. So kind of those three things related to the type of technology you use can effectively still lock you in or limit some of the functionality of BACnet that you could be using. And then the fourth one I had on here is really where the networks become undocumented. As soon as you might hit a tipping point where the problems and the headaches become too much. If there's no documentation, there's no kind of discussion on who's responsible for the network. If there's no domain knowledge in the organization, that's really where folks like us get involved. How do we get our arms around this monster to make sure those critical infrastructure pieces are working? Go ahead, Alex.
Well, yeah, I guess I technically have already answered or asked my question, but Ping, you mentioned earlier, BACnet is open, APIs, have got promise. I am curious on your perspective around where does BACnet get closed down? I mean, is there anything other than what Dan put up there? From
No, Dan
your
had
perspective,
a great
okay.
list. Right now, my biggest pet peeve, and just keep in mind, this is like fresh off the press for me, so it's the biggest annoyance, is that vendors don't leave their engineering tools behind.
Yeah.
So you find something simple you want to change. The threshold was set, the COV threshold was set incorrectly, and you can't change that. It's
Right.
not a BACnet
Without
issue.
making a phone call to the service provider and, basically a half a day of, a fairly high priced person coming on site. Right.
That's right.
Yeah.
I mean, I understand as a business, it's the way they run their business. That's my biggest pet peeve. If you get a system from vendor A, you paid for it, they should leave you the keys so you can go back in the house and change that one thing. Just so you know, there's some building owners with very high power out there that are pushing back on this one, and they're unsuccessful. So
Yeah.
you can try. I'm just saying it's not an open or closed problem. It creates a closed environment, but it's not a technology problem.
Yeah, it's not
right.
broken in the stack.
Okay, thank you.
I really like this graphic from Nexus Labs. If anybody follows or familiar with them, they kind of talk and put out content around smart buildings. Because inherently with BACnet, the word open comes up a lot. And really those can mean two different things and talking about multiple layers. And I thought this was a good way to kind of show like what's the spectrum of open across a couple different levels. So BACnet really is the top level here, when we talk open protocol. And so for the most part, if we said 75% of the building automation industry falls in kind of these three buckets here, it is BACnet at this point. There's still plenty of old legacy stuff out there and, occasionally one-off things that are proprietary. But that, when we talk about like open building automation system or, closed to fully open source, really BACnet kind of answers and fills the role of this top level. As you kind of go through these layers, really that comes back to some of the stuff we were talking about with different businesses, different hardware, like is there competition or the ability for multiple contractors or parties to service it? Do you have the access to the software tools or the license? And really the big distinction, and when people hear open source, they think, oh, it's great, it's going to save us all. Open source tools we've had such good luck with. The challenge is open sourcing building automation. There's not really one set open source, right? There's not an open building automation system for free that everybody can go download. And even if there was, you would need software developers on site to know how to version control, commit, test it, all kinds of stuff. So really, I think when people talk about how do we make more use of BACnet, how do we get BACnet more open, that's really nothing related to BACnet itself. It's all the ecosystem and the contracting world that BACnet is used in. All right, so why does the BACnet network need attention? What is it that, Optigo and the services that we've provided with it, what is it exactly that's getting fixed? Ping mentioned some thresholds on COV values. So there's all kinds of stuff that can happen behind the scenes that there's misconfigurations where devices can't talk to each other, or in a severe scenario, you can have, these problems behind the scenes actually take down devices or buildings or your entire server front end. And those in critical environments can cause lots of problems. You could miss alarms, you could not have graphics that are updating properly, et cetera. So there is a bit of risk and a need to pay attention to the networks to make sure you're hedging against future problems, because it's one of those things, the network isn't a problem until it becomes a problem. And if it's at that point, it's a big problem. So I always tell people it's important, kind of like you go to the doctor, if you're not monitoring the network, it's good to get some kind of physical or checkup at least annually. And or get some blood work done, right? That's kind of what we're doing in the network. We're trying to get some vital signs to understand where is this at? How close are we to, catastrophic failures and risks? So, and a lot of times at the point we get involved, it's, well, there's already a lot of big problems. We're trying to understand the finger pointing and, who's at fault and what do we need to fix. So I'd say the couple biggest areas we see where problems arise are, one, baseline level of broadcast rates that are too high, where MSTP devices, so room controllers, unitary devices, maybe legacy controls, effectively drown in the spam, and they queue up so much data that they cannot report out in a reasonable time, and sometimes that shows up as going offline or taking panels down. So this is one of the things that Optigo's tools do track and grade against. So I think their failure is really around like 10 packets per second. And I think, Ping, you said that in part is because of, the reliability of MSTP devices and, making sure the network's healthy from that regard. Really the target that we try and get folks to, and I'm kind of speaking more from an enterprise scale. If you have just a one building site of BACnet, this isn't, as big of an issue, but if you have, multi-building sites, this is where this gets really important, because the potential for broadcast traffic to go from 1 or 2 or 5 packets per second to 20, 40, 50 higher, there's just a couple bad settings or changes or a new building that's brought online wrong that can completely just tank your entire network. So I think a realistic baseline target that we try and shoot for people is below 5 packets per second of broadcast. Most campuses that I see, whether we're doing a health checkup on or doing kind of the real-time monitoring of network stats, fall between kind of 1 packet per second and 20. So I've never seen anybody at 0. The best are at 1, and if you're below 5, you're great. If you're below 10, you're still safe. It's really as you kind of start to tick around this dial, if you start to get to 40 packets per second, you're on the verge of catastrophe, if not seeing some problems already and just not being aware of them. If you get to 50, you're in the danger zone and there's probably already a problem. So just for some reference, so BACnet broadcast is one of the areas. There are usefulness and reasons for broadcast messaging that reach out to all devices. That is a benefit of BACnet. But if configurations, whether it's a COV setting or a default, I've seen cases where people put a new controller on or a third party, air quality monitoring or lighting controls, and all of a sudden the default setting is just spamming everything on the network all the time, and it doesn't need to be. It was just the vendor didn't know they needed to configure that. It just came out of the box default and caused problems. So oftentimes there's a lot of things that go into BACnet broadcast, so it's kind of peeling back layers of the onion. There's never just one thing that's the culprit. But one or two things can create disaster. So BACnet broadcast rates, definitely an important metric to think of. Visual BACnet, visual networks, the Optigo tools, we'll have Ping talk about in a second, really do a good job of giving you all the other nuts and bolts details behind the scenes as well. So I think with that, I'll maybe turn it over to Ping for a few minutes and let him talk about, the genesis of how they decided to create some of these, the importance of them, and what the products behind the scenes look like.
Yeah, I won't take too much time. And when I got the chance to introduce myself a little bit, I do want to make sure that we get to the end. And if there's any quick questions, in short, we started as a networking company. We sold switches and routers. We decided to focus on smart building industry before we knew what a BACnet controller was and what Whois and IAM are. But quickly, because we were going to this market, we had customers kind of asking us why our network is slow. And I was like, well, your network is not slow. And I would run Wireshark with our friends in the industry and realize what they meant was not the network, it's the networked devices that were slow. And so we transitioned, we added this visual BACnet product in 2016, I think is when it first came out. And then we have a new product called Optical Vision Networks that came out 2 years ago to just help this industry figure out what is happening under the hood, what you can't see that's causing issues. And so that's where we are now. I just put one of the case study on showing that our history, we started from networking to helping people analyze network to solving problems at locations like Dartmouth College, just as an example. Yeah, but again, through Alex and Dan here, we've looked at a lot of sites. We have two products. We have Visual BACnet, Optical Vision Networks. They really are equivalent. It's just we are slowly migrating everyone to Optical Vision Networks. It's a new product. In short, what it does, it looks at network traffic, BACnet network traffic that's going in and out of every device, of a device where you're looking at. So in Dan's case, often he will look from his Niagara server, for example, or from an Intel web server or Allerton Compass, whatever, it doesn't really matter. And we crunch through a bunch of different diagnostics. We look at, as Dan mentioned, one of the example was the amount of BACnet broadcast traffic. Is there any device IDs that's conflicting? Down to more complex things like how long does it take a request to have a response back? How many requests are not responded? Those are indication of weaknesses or problems in the system, allowing you to pinpoint maybe what BACnet router is causing the problem, and so on. It can be used ad hoc, as Dan said. If you want to just do a one quick checkup, you can do that, or you can monitor it so you get alerted when the system changes, or you can compare, a year from today, so on and so forth. A lot of customers use it for auditing before you add analytics. You want to make sure you're not adding on something that won't be able to support it. You can use it for troubleshooting. I know I have a problem. I can't find what the root cause is. Monitoring, let me be proactive in finding those things. And I would say also peacekeeping, as Alex called it. We called it policing, but finger pointing, right? We have 4 vendors. They all say it's someone else's fault. Where is the problem? One quick example, we have this large customer, their blinds was very problematic. They wanted the blinds connected to BACnet system so they can control part of the environment. And they kept going back to the blind system, going, your blind controllers are crap, it's not working. It ended up being that there was something else in the BACnet system that was pretty chatty. Their BACnet broadcast level was too high, and the blind controller was choking. And all they had to do was fix something that was unrelated to the blind system, and they fixed it. So that's, sometimes I like to say, when you stare at the red blinking light, you think that the problem is where the red blinking light is, but really in reality is somewhere else. Right. Yeah.
Yeah, we found some similar things. It can be very complicated and something unrelated that if you weren't keeping an eye on or actually going down to the level of some of these checks and drilling into the diagnostics, in some ways it's been a very good fit to help people with from our organization, because we're very much used to the process of like fault detection and analytics on HVAC devices, right? We're producing checks and trying to figure out what's wrong with this air handler or chiller. And this has really just become kind of another layer to that, that has been very important in a lot of cases where, especially multi-vendor sites, headaches come up, and eventually somebody throws their arms up and says, I don't know how to fix it. Here's my best guess. And it can be completely unrelated. So, we see a lot of cross-vendor issues where, yeah, they didn't know they were working in the right device ID range or they set up a router differently or forgot to connect their routers together. So the weather station from Schneider didn't get, over to Honeywell and et cetera. So, yeah, it's been, I'd say, a fun learning experience for me, kind of to understanding the back end and all the stuff that you guys have been dealing with for a long time too. So, uh, anything else you wanted to add, Ping?
Nope, this is good. Just keep going.
So, evolution of BACnet, like I said, we're proponents of it. I think it's here to stay. When you hear about BACnet or, what's coming next out of vendors, so the couple big things that come up is really BACnet Secure, BACnet SC, the new wave of cybersecurity, and BACnet IP controllers. And then also BACnet starting to go beyond just HVAC. It's been in lighting, there's some in fire alarm, more access control, cameras, et cetera. I think BACnet has a lot of use cases across, the entire built environment. Say, BACnet IP controllers, I think that's every new building eventually will, there'll be no more MSTP except for maybe fringe cases at some point. I don't know if you disagree, Ping, but in essence, some of the principles of, these health checks and watching out for spam and your device IDs, like all these rules of BACnet still apply in many cases. When it comes to BACnet SC, a lot of people, I think, are kind of wondering, well, what really is it? Do I need it? It seems like it's more secure. IT might be asking me about it or mandating it. Personally, we haven't seen a ton of people migrating
adopting it yet
for a variety of reasons. I think there's BACnet SC, I think may serve a niche, but before you start jumping to that, there's already a bunch of other layers of cybersecurity that help protect networks that really should be addressed first. So that's why I always recommend people, if they have questions about it, you really need to look at the entire ecosystem in which you're operating. Because BACnet SC might help, but if you have to manage all the certificates and, people probably already have to deal with headaches on that on servers and manage having to do that with every connected device out there. And oh, by the way, I think in 2027, thanks to Apple, like the rate at which certificates will stay active and expire is going to greatly shrink. So I've kind of advised people to tread lightly, but what's your take on that thing?
Yeah, same BACnet SC. So unless you're running, operating an extreme, and then the keyword here is extreme high privacy, high security environment, and beyond hospitals even, BACnet SC it will have its place. The one place I see that it's going to be very valuable is to replace or complement VPNs. So if you need access to a BACnet system, right now you normally add an old school VPN in front of it, then you gain access to it. You could use BACnet SC in that case. So put one BACnet SC hub, router, actually BACnet SC router, and then that lands you onto the non-encrypted BACnet. That's a really, really good use case of BACnet SC, but replacing every controller, it's cost prohibitive, not just from capital costs, but also operating cost, maintenance costs, as Dan said. The certificate management is quite extensive.
significant.
Yeah, and just so you know, certificate management, when you manage a server, you manage a server from certificate from one server. But if you have 10 controllers, you have to have certificate on all 10. So not just the hub. Every device has its own certificate. So it's quite elaborate.
So if you see that in an engineering spec or somebody copy and paste it, or IT, is asking about it, those are just a couple high level things to be considerate of.
Yep.
So I think we'll kind of end on a discussion here. If people have questions, go ahead and put them in the chat while we wait for that. I would say, yeah, Ping, do you have kind of like a top 2, top 3 list of what are the most common pitfalls that people run into with BACnet, whether it's setting up a system or managing a system? What are some of the things that trip people up the most or have the biggest risk to cause problems?
But the first one's not even the first one. But I will say it. The large majority of BACnet systems out there are not I will say use the word monitored very lightly here, but most systems out there, we have no clue what's underneath the hood. So if you are doing things like, hey, I'm updating my software, hoping that it will do better. I'm changing this to a higher power controller, so hoping things to be better. You have to look. If you don't look underneath the hood, you don't know. So engage with Alex, Dan here at BuildingLogiX. At least get a quick look at what's underneath the hood. If you don't look, you don't know. But the two biggest problems that we see, and by the way, I'm going to leave the conflicting device ID aside. That's a configuration thing. The two biggest ones I will say, one is COV threshold set too small, right? Airflow, and you set the threshold to 1 because that's what the control comes as default. Well, 1 CFM is nothing on an air handler that can handle a couple hundred CFM. So that will flood your network. It will flood if that COV comes from an MSTP device. It will flood the BACnet router. It will flood the server. Quick story: we have a very large site. Their Niagara server crashed once a week. It wasn't, by the way. Dennis crashed once a week. They were panicking. They were having 500,000 change of value every 8 minutes. Now, I'm giving you a bad example, but their server was this massive machine, and the BACnet driver was crashing. And all it was just updating the COV on, unfortunately, in their case, 20,000 points. It took a long time. But once they got to about 20% of the way, the server stopped crashing, and they kept going to make things better. So number one thing is wrong COV. Alex?
Yeah. So Doug Eklund put something on the chat, just kind of referencing some of the challenges associated with I'll say the disparity between network knowledge, or how to deal with the network from the integrator's standpoint. What are some resources that you have put out or that you suggest to owners, contractors, integrators to say, hey, if you want to understand and learn BACnet networks better, here's something that you can do. Here's something that you should do.
That's a tough one, Alex. I'll be honest. There's a few education organizations out there that are offering BACnet courses. I have tremendous respect for what they do. I find that their knowledge is still very superficial, very high level. I understand how BACnet works, but not the dangers of it. Unfortunately, it sounds a little bit like plugging ourselves in, but we offer a BACnet course, and actually we don't offer it on a regular basis anymore, where we go through the application of BACnet. We help people understand, just like what Dan said, when you have excessive broadcast, what happens to the system, right? And then from there, appreciate what are things to look for. BACnet routers, by the way, is the second highest problem in the system, is that these BACnet routers are overloaded. It's not that the BACnet routers are done poorly. You can't blame the vendors. But when you have 50 packets per second going through a BACnet router that also has to do all these things and manages 50 MSTP network, 50 MSTP devices that's running a chiller plant, I mean, this little thing,
it's a lot.
It's a lot. So yeah. Unfortunately here, Alex, think here, if there's an interest in this group to offer a BACnet course, contact Alex. We may be able to organize something through BuildingLogiX. We are not in the business of education. We found it is a necessary evil to help our customers get the most out of our product. So we directly only offer cohorts of 20 people. So when an organization come to us and say, okay, Optigo, we want a BACnet course, we require a minimum. If there's an interest here, contact Alex, contact Dan. We might be able to do one through BuildingLogiX if we aggregate enough people. But sure. Again, and I can send the curriculum, Alex, you can pass it over. It's the one that where Dan and I met, right? But we'll go through all these things, appreciating what is device ID, how a BACnet router works, how BBMD works, and at the end of it, just having an understanding of how BACnet networking work, and therefore being able to at least be knowledgeable enough to have that discussion.
Yeah. So another question then, I mean, just looking at some of the people that are on the list, and listening now, a lot of them are at campuses, but some of them are contractors too. And, some of them are customers of yours and ours both. Some of them, may not be using either one of us. What's too big, if that is such a thing, in terms of where you guys fit well, and what's too small? Meaning, hey, if I'm a contractor and it's probably more around that type of application, where does this fit, or what is the best application of your solution, your software, and how it delivers value?
Yeah, our sweet spot is 500 devices and above. When I say devices, anything with a device ID, 500 devices and above. There is some value in kind of that 200 to 500, but it tends to be a little lower. And if you're a contractor, I mean, you can get a 1 month subscription to just at least check that you didn't screw something up obvious. But again, that sweet spot is 500 devices and above. I will also say, as soon as you add things that are beyond straight HVAC controls. What I mean by that, if you are implementing lighting control, therefore there's a BACnet gateway to lighting, you should consider monitoring the network traffic. If you're starting to do analytics, doesn't matter who you use, hopefully here you're using BuildingLogiX, you should do network monitoring because analytics pulls more data from your network. If the system was first designed for what we call command and control, temperature's too hot, turn this on, temperature too cold, turn that off, right? Things like that. There's very little exchange of data, but as soon as you start turning up analytics, you're looking at data every few seconds, every few minutes, the system is doing orders of magnitude more. So again, 500 devices and above, if you're doing things beyond command and control HVAC, you should consider at least looking at it once a year, I would say. And then when you get to 1,000 devices and above, I mean, if 1,000 devices and above, you're looking at 10 plus subnets. You really need to take a look at it.
Yeah.
One of the common problems I see on, we'll say, especially campuses that have been around for a really long time, is that if those health checkups don't take place at least annually, or you're not doing some level of monitoring, when buildings get renovated, when controllers get replaced, like that can be a big cause of spam, where there's a lot of ghost IDs behind the scenes and old references and point, links into different logic or trend logs that you didn't know were there. We just missed Halloween for that good analogy, but there's a lot of old stuff that is phantoms of the past, especially on networks where you've gone through the buildings have been around long enough to do an upgrade or two on or a migration to a new building automation server and stuff. I think that's another area where it's really important to have some type of checkup, because you'd be surprised how much just baseline stuff will exist in the background from old communications.
And I will say, I know if you aren't doing this already and you are running a campus, that first time is going to be very overwhelming. By the way, if you have not done this and you're running a campus, I suggest you put in a wager what your score will be before you even look at it. It'll probably be 20% below. It's very overwhelming, but we're here to guide you, right? Whether it's Alex's team or Optigo's team, will help you guide through that big sea of things you need to deal with. We'll focus on one thing at a time, right? If you dedicate, by the way, my recommendation is if you dedicate half a day a month, okay, to look and fix a couple of issues, it's going to take a long time to get to that green score, but just get started, right? If your system is not broken, if you can put 4 hours a month, dedicate one technician that has access to engineering tools to learn and take one thing at a time, even if it's not the highest thing, you will get to get to a point where your system will be performing well, and then from there it's just monitoring.
Well, I think we're about out of time here, top of the hour. So if anybody has any follow-up questions, feel free to reach out. Ping, thanks so much for joining. Thanks,
Yeah,
Alex.
thank you, Ping.
Thank you, everybody else, for your time.
Thank you, everyone.
Keep an eye out for invites for future months. Appreciate it and have a good day.